Hello, thanks for tuning in, and thanks to David Helmley and Jonathan Carrera at Adobe who asked me to speak with you today. I have a story to tell, and they won't let me Snyder cut this presentation, so let's just dive in. If the color and absence of my hair are not enough of a clue, I am old. But because I've been around for a while, I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of different, hopefully interesting stuff in this industry. For example, software. If you've used After Effects, there are some bits here and there that I designed, like Shatter and Radio Waves and Card Wipe and a few more. I also ran my own production company for a while, doing desktop video and animation when that was a brand new thing. My first broadcast gig came in 1995 on the original Jon Stewart Show, a talk show that was created by MTV and then syndicated by Paramount. For my part, we used After Effects to animate Photoshop puppets for a recurring comedy segment. I guess in that respect, not much has changed in 25 years. I was also a professional actor in my younger days, studied theater in grad school, and worked briefly on Broadway, which is neither here nor there. But later in life, the combo of being comfortable communicating and knowledgeable about technology led to a career as a teacher and a trainer. For several years, when Adobe shipped physical software, it included a disc from my company, Total Training, that was performed or produced or directed by me. A side note, one of Total Training's directors from the early 2000s, a young man named Jason Walliner that I hired straight out of college, just directed the new Borat film. Of course, I'm very proud of Jason, but I bring that up because one thing you'll learn if you decide to go into broadcast production, a phenomenon which is very similar to theater, by the way, is that TV production can be a very small world. Through all of this, I developed a great relationship with the After Effects team at Adobe. I was an active beta and even alpha tester for new features and versions. A few years ago, several of the founding After Effects engineering team formed a new group to create a product which was called Beaker in alpha, and later Adobe Animal in beta. Obviously, the engineers were Muppet fans, and this was the software that would eventually be renamed Character Animator. Personally, I thought Beaker was fun. I created the first actual product with the software when my wife and I made an animated Christmas card using that first alpha version. At the time, the full-speed, real-time distortions it was capable of were an astonishing feat of engineering. Heck, I'm still amazed at what it does. But to be honest, I wasn't initially sure about the commercial prospects for the software. Were there enough people making character animations to justify it?
Is this episode going on the air live?
No, Homer. Very few cartoons are broadcast live. It's a terrible strain on the animator's wrist.
While Beaker was in development, the creators of The Simpsons contacted the team about using Character Animator to create and perform a live Homer puppet for a broadcast segment where Homer would answer questions live on the air. Live performance was not what Character Animator was initially designed for. It was envisioned as a record and refine tool, gradually building up a final performance that would be exported for delivery. But other creative folks quickly saw the potential of Character Animator's real-time interaction as an opportunity to create a new kind of live performance animation. Simpsons Live was the first example of this, and it was very primitive, but it worked. The Character Animator team wrote a custom Blackmagic driver to output the contents of the stage as a live video stream with an alpha channel, and in the studio, they comped it along with several pre-recorded bits during the live segment. Homer only had a few gestures or expressions, and in the 5 minutes that the segment ran, you could see the seams starting to show. But it worked. Shortly after this, I was invited to deliver a keynote at NAB, and I decided to use Character Animator to bring my presentation to life, live on stage in front of an audience. I did this along with another brand new tool that Adobe was showing for the first time, Puppetron, which I used to create a ghostly version of my subconscious that I shared the stage with. While I didn't work on The Simpsons Live, Adobe was kind enough to loan me the programmable keyboard controller that they had used for that, which still had the little labels for Homer's gestures from the earlier event. If you're interested in seeing a bit of obscure industry history, look up Brian Maffitt's Epic Failure on YouTube. It's worth a few minutes of your time. Shortly after this, the Character Animator team recommended me for a gig at Good Morning America, where we would design and operate a live puppet of one of their morning hosts in a bit timed to coincide with the Oscars. I would learn a great deal from that experience. The GMA team loved the idea of a motion-captured animated character, but they had unrealistic expectations of what Character Animator could do at the time. They wanted the puppet to track their hands and walk around the set and other things the software couldn't yet do. The on-screen talent, while gifted talk show hosts, were not fundamentally improv comedians, and they didn't know how to emote to an empty space that would be filled with a cartoon character in the control room. So even though we designed a really beautiful, expressive puppet, and even engineered a multicam solution that would allow the control room to switch between different angles and zoom levels during the segment, it was ultimately not a good match for the format of the show. After 3 solid months of work, Good Morning America pulled the plug 3 days before we were scheduled to air. And none of us got paid a dime, which taught me yet another important lesson about broadcast TV, the importance of a good contract. While all this was going on in the middle of Times Square, a few blocks up the street, a young man I can only describe as a visionary genius named Tim Lukey had been working in the art department of The Late Show and pitched an idea for doing live animation using the new tool from Adobe called Character Animator, which had finally gone into public beta. Tim had no prior contact with the Adobe team, no inside track. He just started poking around with the tools like any other creative customer. And before long, some live animated comedies started happening at the Ed Sullivan. First, it was A Bluebird of Happiness, then The Ghost of Abraham Lincoln. But people really took notice when an animated version of candidate Donald Trump appeared as a guest on the show during the campaign season. This became a popular segment and culminated in an incredibly ambitious project. Stephen had a live election special on Showtime, and Tim, along with Late Show writer and supervising producer Matt Lappin, conceived a 5-minute animated introduction that chronicled Trump's journey from the White House Correspondents' Dinner through to the election.
Make America great again!
It's important to note that that entire animation was animated by Tim and only Tim, working diligently, hunched over his Wacom Cintiq over a period of only a few weeks. Creating cinematic character animation in such a short amount of time with a team of 1 is unheard of, even with today's Adobe suite, but he did it. Well, let's face it, nobody at The Late Show expected Donald Trump to win. And in the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, The Late Show team brought the series idea to Showtime as a weekly animated show, and it was picked up. Nobody had succeeded in trying anything quite like this before. The Colbert team, under a very tight deadline, needed to build an animation studio to produce this series, and basically they had Tim, a couple new producers, and an empty floor at the Ed Sullivan Theater. Maybe Adobe felt bad about how the GMA thing went down, but when Tim reached out to them looking for someone to help build this crazy thing out, the person that they recommended was me. I have a history of freaking out at interviews. Sometimes the weight of an opportunity can be crushing. This was the reason I left acting. I hate auditions, which are the speed dating of job interviews. This time, however, I was calm. I knew I was in my wheelhouse and the opportunity was a good fit. I mean, really, if you made a Venn diagram of professional experience, skills, and industry connections, the overlap with my resume was absolutely perfect. The job description might as well have been written by me. I knew I could help. And this is a very valuable thing in a job interview and possibly the most important thing I can tell you today. When you're interviewing for a job, the people interviewing you are desperately hoping for you to be great. They are not your adversary. They want you to solve problems for them. Keep that in mind and interviews become a lot easier. Well, I was a little bit starstruck seeing the Late Show offices. I was a fan of Colbert since he was a correspondent on The Daily Show. And looking around the offices, I recognized some of the props from the show. Tim was great. I met him and Matt Lappin, also great, the writer-producer I mentioned earlier. If you watch The Late Show, you've seen Matt performing in a lot of the opening bits. It was a long interview. I was a bit nervous when I was unfamiliar with some of the animated shows that Tim and Matt were citing for reference, but I immediately had ideas about how the tech for the show might work. We had a great detailed chat, and as we were wrapping up, I pulled up a picture from my Facebook page. And remember, I said I studied theater in New York. And remember when I said theater and broadcast were both small worlds? Well, the picture was of me and some of my grad school classmates at a party. Well, it just so happens in my class was a woman named Evie McGee, who would go on to marry Stephen Colbert. I just thought it was a sweet coincidence, and Matt asked for a copy of the photo. Later, I would learn that Matt ran into Evie after our interview. She spends a lot of time at the theater. He showed her the pic, asked, "Do you know that guy?" She said, "Oh my God, that's Brian. Where did you get this?" He said, "We're going to hire him." So what exactly had I signed on for? What was the gig? I was offered the position of technical director. Always an overachiever, I confess at the time I wished I could have a dual role of both technical director and animation director. This was stupid. The job of a TD on a broadcast animated show, especially while also building out a new studio, is huge. We had tons of machines to buy, we had a software workflow to work out, a computer network that needed to be fast and support all of our machines, and a server and backup server to hold all of our digital stuff. The smallest detail could set back our schedule for days. For example, Wacom was a year away from updating its product line. As a result, their best tablet design, the Cintiq 22 HD, was several years old at this point, and we're using fairly old DVI connectors when the rest of the world had moved on to HDMI and now USB-C. But the video ports on the new iMacs were USB-C. They're common today, but they were a bit exotic when we were starting out, and it took us more than a week of trial and error to identify an adequate supply of compatible adapters so we could plug in our new tablets into our new iMacs so people could start working. We had lots of people to hire and a limited amount of space to put them in. We needed everyone to comfortably fit in the space, and of course just hiring all these people takes a long time too. Every department needed different software to do its job, so there was a lot of research to do. But we knew early on that at least the production team would be dependent on the Adobe Creative Cloud. Above all, we would depend on Photoshop and Adobe Character Animator, which was an officially released product now, not just in beta or alpha. But let's face it, it was still new. It was still largely unproven under pressure. Doing a one-off animated character that talks and waves its hands a little bit is one thing. But a fully animated show with a lot of characters that need to be on screen at once and need to interact? It may sound simple to have a character hand something to another character, but this sort of thing turned out to be a major engineering puzzle. Fortunately, our history with the Adobe team made them excellent partners. They wanted our show to succeed as much as we did, and the software as it exists today contains features that were explicitly designed to solve problems for our production. A funny thing about broadcast production is that things typically take a lot longer than you expect them to. We moved as quickly as we could, but there were still things that move faster than other things. We had a lot of the technology strategy sorted out before we even knew what the show was. The person who's responsible for the overall personality of the show is called a showrunner. And in our case, our showrunner, R.J. Freed, wasn't hired for many weeks. So Tim's designers were making decisions in the dark, based on our best guess. The show didn't even have a title for months. Our placeholder title was Cartoon Donald Trump, and evidence of that title still exists in the corners of the studio, since we had to make diagrams and documents and name them something. Eventually, of course, the show was titled Our Cartoon President. The first creative hires were lead designers to start working on settings and characters and a template for future versions of those things. We hired several key people early on, Rob Chandler, Todd MacArthur, Kirill Uritsky among them, and they set to work with Tim defining the look of the show. When R.J. Freed, the showrunner, came on and the writing team came together, the show quickly evolved from a cartoon character sitting on a couch talking to Stephen Colbert into a realistic, almost reverential take on Washington politics, with beautiful paintings of famous landmarks and sets. It was felt that the silliness of the characters and their stories would play better juxtaposed against more realistic backgrounds. Transitioning from being my own boss to working for a big company was hard, but very much worth it. I didn't fill out a timesheet for 25 years before I took this job, and there was definitely a change in attitude. At Total Training, for example, I had my hands in everything, from production to marketing to building sets to running cameras to editing to writing scripts and directing the shoots. At a company like CBS, things just don't work that way. They can't. The productions are simply too big, there's too much on the line, and as much as I instinctively think otherwise, I am in fact a cog in a much bigger, insanely complicated machine. And machines work better if the various cogs stay put and do their own thing. The challenge of even doing a presentation like this one is that CBS is very strict about revealing any proprietary information about productions. So forgive me if I speak in mostly general terms about production details, but one of my favorite secrets of our show was a simple one. We hired great people. I definitely strayed out of my lane a few times and I got pushed back, but I soon learned that when you hire great people, there is value in letting those people do their jobs. Once I started to hone in on my role, there was plenty of interesting things for me to focus on. The Ed Sullivan Theater is an amazing historic building, a full Broadway theater converted into a TV studio, attached to an old Manhattan office building where most of the daily work gets done. I'm a sucker for history, and working in the building where the Beatles and Elvis were first introduced to America, not to mention all those years of the David Letterman show, is still inspiring. Trouble was, we only had one floor of the building to make our show. This quickly proved to be a tight fit. I built 3D models of the floor plan to help us design an optimal layout, and we managed to get it to work. But it was, let's say, intimate. It wasn't helped by the fact that our floor only had 2 toilets. A huge early challenge was a recording studio. We needed a good one to record the voiceovers for our show, but all we had at our disposal was a portable whisper room that was set up in the middle of an otherwise busy room. This would not work because the containing room was an active space, and the whisper room only dampens sound. It's not really soundproof. Plus, it would have been really distracting. So we set about to soundproof another room. If you've ever tried to soundproof an existing room, you know how hard it is. If you've ever tried to soundproof a room in a Manhattan office building on a busy street with construction noise and occasional emergency vehicles, it's practically impossible. So we got a lucky break when we learned that a high-tech screening room that had been owned by David Letterman was coming available after a long lease. It was a bit of extra space on a different floor, and it had the extraordinary feature of being almost totally soundproof. A fire truck could drive by on the street outside, and you can't hear it. We took this room, it became our recording studio, and later we converted the projection room into a second studio. It was a perfect use of the space, but it also allowed us to preserve enough of the details of the room to honor its heritage. The room itself is eerily silent. I have slept in that room on long work nights, and it's so quiet you can hear the blood pumping in your own ears. Takes some getting used to. But let's talk about the workflow for the new show, which in many parts is similar to other animated shows that use digital tools. Once a script is approved and recorded, it's cut into a radio play. Our storyboard team takes the radio play, breaks it into scenes, and then draws and lightly animates a rough version of each scene. Those scenes are cut into an animatic, which helps the editors time out the beats of the show. If a storyboard scene introduces a new character or a new gesture or a costume or a prop for an existing character, or we need a new background, the design department creates and adds those elements. The drawn animation team will create the frames for any new gestures in Photoshop. Once they're done, the rigging team brings the Photoshop file into Character Animator and ensures that the new additions work correctly, and add keyboard shortcuts and triggers as needed for the performance animators to use. One thing that may be surprising is how we use Character Animator. Your first impression of Adobe Character Animator may be that it automatically animates everything for you. People online commonly say the show is animated by the computer. This is not remotely true, at least not for us. Character Animator was initially designed for a record and refine workflow, then heavily customized for live performances. But the show aesthetic was trying to be more like a traditionally animated show. So we used Character Animator more as a visual sequencer, using the motion capture for some head motion and using the lip sync tools to help with that. But otherwise, the animation is hand-drawn, just like a classic animated show would be produced. At any rate, once the files are rigged, they're passed on to the performance team. They use Character Animator to calculate lip sync and add some movement to the heads and bodies of the characters with motion capture. And then, of course, they use the triggered gestures to bring the character to life. This will be repeated for all of the characters in a scene. Characters then combined with backgrounds, lighting, and effects in Adobe After Effects. And once exported, the editorial department assembles them into the final show. So putting the show together takes a lot of teams with different talents. This shouldn't be surprising if you've ever watched the credits to an animated film. A big advantage to this approach is as the season goes on, the library of characters grows in number, as well as in expressiveness and complexity, so the potential visual quality of the show will grow over time, almost by default. So how much does Character Animator help to speed things along? Let's look at The Simpsons again. An episode of The Simpsons takes about 6 months from writing to delivery. From my hire date in August of 2017 to our broadcast premiere in May 2018 was 6 months. So we were able to produce our first episode while building one of the largest animation studios in New York City in the same amount of time. While we wanted the show to be as topical as possible, we also had to work a few weeks ahead just to be able to meet the schedule. Our writers had to do a lot of research and be excellent prognosticators. In practice, the bulk of an OCP episode took about 14 weeks from writing to delivery. But for maximum topicality, the first 5 minutes of each show, the cold open, is produced in a mere 3 to 4 days, the same week of the show. These were busy days and some late nights. Some of our funniest stuff came out of those last-minute sessions. Following this model, we broadcast for 3 seasons on Showtime, plus an election episode featuring musical numbers and a giant Hillary Clinton Gundam. The cast got bigger as we added more characters, and a few celebrities signed on to do some of the voices. The show in general looked better as we added more expressive animation and sophisticated animation effects. One of my favorite offshoots of working at the Ed Sullivan is being able to pop down and watch tapings of The Late Show whenever we liked. The energy in that theater during a live taping is incredible to experience. Starting in our second year, Stephen asked Late Night Cartoons to produce a Christmas special, and it was so well received it became an annual tradition. A trilogy of Santa-centered political specials that used a slightly different visual style from Cartoon President and really upped the ante in terms of animation and effects. We also produced another election special, Election Night Rises. And again, the turnaround on these pieces was ridiculous, with at least 1 or 2 of them getting done in a mere 3 weeks from script to air. These were some of my favorite projects, not only because they were creative and funny, and not only because I got to personally animate some shots and design a lot of the effects, but especially because they would typically be shown live during the late show to an enthusiastic crowd. It's incredibly rewarding to hear a live audience laugh at your work. Looking forward to getting back to live audiences someday. During the first half of the last season of Cartoon President, a new show was greenlit for late night cartoons called Tuning Out the News. The idea for the show featured cartoon news personalities interviewing real live humans in a spoof of cable news shows. Where OCP had 10 weeks to produce an episode, Tuning Out the News schedule would be a bit more aggressive. Not only would the team create a whole new episode from scratch every week, that's right, from a 14-week turnaround to a 1-week turnaround, but it would release shorter segments of the show every day. While the animation would necessarily be simpler than on OCP, technically the fast turnaround meant that parts of production would be much more complicated, as we simultaneously focused on streamlining every single step of the process. Besides talent, time was our most precious resource. We retooled the Letterman audio studio and turned it into our own NASA control room with the idea of doing live motion capture and audio capture of the talent, who were performing all in the same room together while we captured their performances on separate video streams. This was basically bonkers, but we got it all working. We shot a whole week of tests in the week leading up to our premiere with live guests, including TV personalities and politicians. The days were long, but the whole thing was working well, and on Thursday afternoon, we all agreed we were ready for our debut recording the following week. The following day, a Friday, the whole team gathered together for the announcement that we would no longer be coming into the office because of COVID. Our Cartoon President still had half of a season to deliver. Tuning Out the News would obviously miss its premiere. Fortunately, that delay would only last 2 weeks. Cartoon President scrambled to send all the artists and animators home with their work machines to continue animating remotely. We upgraded people's home internet as needed to keep the files flowing through the pipeline. We reevaluated every step of the process to see where we could reduce file sizes and increase efficiency. We adapted technologies that were mostly used by game streamers to allow us to communicate more effectively and send video streams between different locations to speed up production. We reconfigured important machines that needed to talk to each other at the theater and set them up for remote control. Everyone invested in their home setups to make them faster and better. I may have gone a little bit over the top. The hardest thing to replace was our fast corporate network. We tried cloud storage like Google Drive and Box, but all those services have storage limits or file size limits. Our files were big, and we had to move lots of them around to make a show, so this was a problem. We finally settled on a product called LucidLink, which works very well. It's a virtual NAS in the cloud, which worked the most like our internal network. If you're an Adobe customer, you will likely hear more about this product in the near future. So now it's a year later. The team is now located all around the country, no longer limited to New York City. The work-from-home adjustment wasn't immediately perfect for everyone, of course, but everyone's experience is different. I was lucky. For the most part, I love the new setup. My commute to and from work used to be 3 hours a day, so working from home gives me a lot of that time back, which is an enormous benefit. The new workflows are mostly very efficient, and we've compensated for the pinch points that we originally struggled with. Even if we did go back to the theater, we would likely continue to produce the show with new efficiencies that we learned in this remote world. Some other cool things happened in the downtime. Adobe Character Animator won an Emmy.
Thank you to the Television Academy for recognizing our work on Adobe Character Animator. I'd love to brag about the killer team surrounding me, but this is our chance to thank the folks who helped us get here. Thank you to those who testified to the Academy on our behalf. Tim Lukey and Brian Maffitt at CBS, Jacob Morgan at Walt Disney Television, Katie Weber at Pixel, Dave Waite at Zookeeper, the Simpsons animation team, and Steve Ford at Adobe.
I'll take it from here. That's better. Thank you to everyone at Adobe who believed in Project Animal, including Steve Warner, Scott Belsky, Brian Lampkin, Gavin Miller, and Shantanu Narayan. A million thanks to all the character animator users out there who tell their stories with humor and style. You took our little animation program and squeezed magic out of it. And finally, thank you to our families who deal with us being overly animated all the time.
Today we're in our second season of Tuning Out the News on Paramount+. Late Night Cartoons is continuing to pitch new shows for the future. If you're interested in a career in broadcast animation, let me know. You can reach me at bmaffitt on Twitter. That's bmaffitt with 2 F's and 2 T's. CBS is a great company to work for. If you're not into animation, check out the job listings at the CBS portal to see if anything there catches your fancy at viacomcbs.careers. One thing I can assure you is a big company like CBS offers tremendous opportunity for personal growth. For example, the creator of our show, Tim Lukey, started out as a graphics intern straight out of college on The Colbert Show. And another of our PAs in Season 1 of OCP, Olivia Sanabria, has risen through the ranks and is now a segment producer on Tuning Out the News. As a matter of fact, just last week, Olivia and I started working on a brand new pilot segment at the Sullivan Theater. So while we're all getting used to the new normal, life is beginning to show signs that it may be returning to some semblance of the old normal pretty soon.